that halacha again, which basically states that the witnesses need to sign themselves. They have to be able to sign their names, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro. Okay. Utzrichim ha'idim lachtom ba'atzman. The witnesses have to sign their names themselves. Ve'ed she'eino yodea lachtom ba'atzmo, u'mitzaveh la'acher lachtom chatimato, if a particular witness does not know how to sign his own name. And this happens, by the way. Guy is Shomer Shabbos. He's assigned as a witness to the ksuva, but he doesn't know how to sign his name. So one of the things that we tell the chassan is that when you assign someone to be your aid ksuva, it's not just enough that they have to be Shomer Shabbos, they also have to know how to sign their name. And if a guy
they have to sign it in Hebrew or in English? That's what we mean.
It's a good question. They have to be able to sign their name in Hebrew. I don't know whether that's halachically required or whether that's just the standard practice. I'm not sure about that, Paul. And
that explains why so many couldn't sign their name.
Correct. And so what we do is we ask the people sometimes if they express a hesitancy, we ask them to sign their name on a blank piece of paper before they sign the $300 ksuva, just to make sure, because we don't want someone to mess up the whole ksuva, because, and unfortunately it does happens more often than you know. Okay, so anyway, so what happens if a person instructs, he's a witness, and he instructs another person to sign on his behalf? So how does he do that? The Mesiras HaKolmas, he says, what I'll do is I'll give you the pen, you'll take the pen from me, we'll make a kinyan, and you'll act as my proxy for signature purposes. Ein ze klum. He says that doesn't work. Shaharei ze ke'ed mipi eid, because it's like having one witness testify based on another witness's testimony. In other words, the guy who's signing is not a witness to the transaction that the first guy actually saw. So he's being told, sign because I saw something. Well, I didn't see it. So just like there's halacha that an aid mipi aid is not admissible, I can't come to testify in Beis Din and say that Yankel told me that he saw a transaction. Beis Din doesn't accept that testimony. So ve'ein tzarich lomar im mitzaveh le'eid hasheni she'ein kan ela eid echad, and that's certainly true. If he tells the first witness, there's two witnesses usually, right? So witness number one signs, and then witness number two says to witness number one, do me a favor, sign on my behalf also. Does not work. It's not a legal document. Aval im hamischayiv ba'atzmo chosem al hashtar kamo shenogim achshav ve'eina yodea lachtom u'mitzaveh la'acher la'achtom chatimato b'mesiras hakulmus. But let's say the party to the transaction says, I'm going to sign, but because there's a space for the chassan, let's say, to sign on the bottom of the ksuba. But he says, you know what? I'm going to have someone sign instead of me. I'm too nervous to sign my name, or he doesn't know how to sign his name. So he gives the pen to somebody else to sign on his behalf. Ubeiz eidim chasumim tachteha lekayim shezuhi chasimasu shetziva lachtom b'mesiras hakulmus harei ze shtar kosher. As long as the witnesses sign at the bottom that they actually saw somebody else sign the name instead of the debtor party, or instead of the chassan, let's say. So the two witnesses sign on the bottom that that they can fulfill that this guy committed himself to the kinyan. So then that's a kosher shtar. And the reason ostensibly why that's a kosher shtar is because the shtar would be kosher without that party's signature at all, just like in our ksuvas today. The standard ksuva does not have a space for the chassan to sign or for the kala to sign, but they are the parties who are committing to the transaction, and yet we still say that the shtar is kosher. Parents, well, that's for the Tanoim you're talking about. The parents don't sign their names on the Tanoim. That's right. The Ksuva is the Chassan himself, and the Tanoim is the parents. Okay, so therefore, that's the reason why we can have someone other than the debtor party sign, because his signature is not crucial. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Ein ze klum. He says it's meaningless if one of the witnesses has someone else sign on his behalf. Avol b'makom shenagu kain shehasofer chosem al pi ha'ed. So he says, but what if that's the minhag hamakom? What if there's rampant illiteracy within the Jewish community, and the only way that we can get two witnesses to be party for a shtar is that the scribe who's filling out the shtar signs on behalf of the witness. And he writes, Shechosem Ploni ben Ploni, Chosam b'mesiras hakulmus o b'tzivoy shel Ploni ben Ploni. And he writes, I'm signing on behalf of such and such a witness who instructed me, either gave me the pen or instructed me to sign. Hol v'kiblu alehem b'nei ha'ir lasos eduso ke'edus ha'ed ha'reza kosher. So the chiddush over here is that once that becomes the town or the locale's convention, and that it's become an accepted mode of creating a legally binding transaction, then it's kosher. The havalei kahaditna nemon alai abba, the whole v'kiblo lios dayano aid kabalaso kabala v'hu adin hacha. He says the Gemara does allow a relative to be a witness for a debtor or to be a judge in a case where his son is a litigant in a situation where he stands to lose money. In other words, or he stands to gain money. Let's say both parties accept a relative as the presiding judge or as the presiding witness. Once all parties accept upon themselves someone who's not kosher, then halachically it's a legally binding transaction. Because if both parties consent to people who are not kosher edim, then all other parties of interest accept this, so then it can be legally binding. So similarly, even though you normally require a shtar to have the witness's signature, but once a community accepts upon themselves a particular standard, so then that becomes the legally binding document in that locality. It's the same reason why we don't require witnesses to sign contracts in the modern world, and we can still uphold it in court, even in a Beis Din, because that's considered to be the modern convention. That's the way people commit themselves to agreements, right? So that's the idea. And I would imagine that this would have had very significant applications in different periods of Jewish history where there was rampant illiteracy, and it was difficult for people to sign their names. And sometimes in the little shtetl, the only person who knew how to write was the sofer, which is that's just the way it was. Now, who is he quoting over here? He's quoting the Shilas Teshuvas Rashba. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's in the medieval period. It's the Dark Ages. Okay. Shahareze ke'ed mipi aid. He says normally the reason why it's not kosher is because it's like one witness signing or testifying based on someone else's witnessing. Mishum de'aid b'sha'a shehu chosem b'shtar harei ki'ilu me'id bebeis din. He says, because when you sign on a shtar, it's as if you're testifying in Beis. It's if at that moment you're testifying in Beis Din. And so if a guy were to testify in Beis Din that someone else told me to testify, that would be completely inadmissible. As the Gemara says, that once witnesses sign a piece of paper, it's as if their testimony has already been cross-examined in Beis Din. That being the case, in Kain Shtar Shechasimbo Shimon v'mitzvus Ruvain pasulhu, and therefore, if Shimon is the signatory and signing on behalf of Ruvain, that's pasul. Shahareim yavo Shimon v'yoid bebeistin b'shlichus v'mitzvus Ruvain lo mekabel may do so, because if Shimon would come to Beis Din and he would say, "I didn't see this, but I'm testifying on behalf of Ruvain who told me to come. He couldn't make it, so he asked me to testify on his behalf." Of course, the Beis Din would throw that out of court. Filu yamod sham Ruvain v'yagid gamkein b'piv ela shehabeis din lo mevinim l'shono v'shimon hu meturgamon beino uvein habeis din nami yedu so pasul. Let's go even one step further. Let's say somebody testifies in Beis Din. He's the witness, but he only speaks Korean, and he needs, therefore, a translator. So that's not admissible in a Beis Din, because you never know whether the translator is translating correctly from Korean to English. There's no such law in secular law. I would imagine that interpreters are admissible. Have to be certified. So what do you do in a situation like that? Okay. Mishum demipihem amarachmana, because the Torah says that the testimony must be from the mouth of the witnesses. Belachein hu hadin bishtar, and therefore the halach is no different with a contract. Ichosem echad b'tzivei ha'ed pasul, the lo karina be'mipihem. And therefore, if one person signs on behalf of another person, that's completely, in other words, the person who's the signatory didn't see it. He's signing as it's like testifying from somebody else. Ela imkein hayid b'fnei shlosha b'kasbu b'mosav tlasa kechada havina kad asid kadmana ploni kach b'kach. The only thing that would work is if a person were to, let's say, express his testimony outside of Beis Din to a group of 3 people, and then these 3 people would write down in a shtar that we established an ad hoc Beis Din, and in our presence, so-and-so testified the following. They could bring that piece of paper to a Beis Din, and Beis Din could use that could admit that as testimony. That's not aid mipi aid. That's not one witness testifying from another witness, but it's rather an ad hoc Beis Din being formed to accept specifically for the purpose of accepting testimony, and then that Beis Din's testimony, or the document that they write to corroborate the testimony, could be admitted into a Beis Din. Okay. All right. So ubeiz edim chasumim tachteha. So let's say the chassan signs the ksuva, but he doesn't know how to sign his name, so he asks someone else to sign for him, and then 2 witnesses sign beneath it, saying that we can confirm that the chassan has entered into this agreement. Right? Davka shnei edim dahainu shechosmim ani ploni ben ploni chasamti b'mitzvas ploni ben Ploni, o b'mesirus hakulmus shel Ploni. That he has to also, the signatory of the chassan signatory has to, basically what they are signing to. In other words, what you could have is 2 witnesses who sign on the bottom of the ksuva. There is an opinion, this is going according to the opinion that when you sign, you actually enact a kinyan. So let's say the chassan decides he wants to enact the kinyan through a signature, but he can't sign his name. So he has someone else sign for him. Then the witnesses on the bottom can say, we were witness to the fact that Shimon signed on behalf of Reuven the chassan. Okay? Okay, so then that's a shtar kosher, and the reason is l'kayim shezuhi chasima. So umeidim shetziva lahem lachto, and they testify that we were told to sign. Aval eina meidim al gufa inyan hanizkar b'shtar. Dim lo kein haval shtar gamar. So he says, so in this particular situation, the witnesses are not witness to the commitment of the chassan, to the actual kinyan on the ksuva, to the actual generation of debt, because if they were, and they just signed it, then it would for sure be a kosher shtar. Here, what they're signing to is that the chassan asked us to witness a signature that was done on his behalf, and we saw that he indebted himself thereby by asking Shimon to sign on his behalf. So hareza shtar kosher. So then that's a valid shtar. Va'af b'makom shelo kiblu b'nei ha'ir minhag zemi kol makom mahani. And this is true even if that's not the local convention. Dahad de'ba'in kiblu b'nei ha'ir hainu dafke b'makom dahachasima ba b'tur edus. He says the only time that you need the community to accept upon themselves to bend the rules is only when the witnesses are asking other people to sign on their behalf. And therefore, you need that to become the convention, because if it doesn't become the consensus convention, so then it's a completely invalid document. But if the signature is meant to represent that the party of interest, the debtor, is obligating himself to fulfill certain terms, that certainly helps, even if he asks someone else to sign for him and witness that proxyship. Kain kasav hashach. This is according to the shach. Va'ain b'ktzos hachoshen shecholik al zeh. V'daito digam hecha sheba l'chayiv atzma b'davar she'eno chayiv nami bo'inun chasimaso mamish below mo'ol bazeh shlichos. However, the ktzos hachoshen disagrees, and he opines that even when the debtor asks someone else to sign on his behalf and the witnesses witness that proxyship, it doesn't work. In other words, there is an opinion that of the Ksos HaChoshen that doesn't work, even though the Rav Shulchan Aruch says that it does work, even though the Shach says that it does work, the Ksos HaChoshen is machmir. So you have, therefore, a more stringent opinion that in all situations, even when the debtor himself is signing, it needs to be his own signature. Okay. That's a good question. I think Paul asked that a moment ago before you came in, and I don't know whether the halacha allows for a person signing in a foreign language. It could be it does. I'm not really sure. I've never really looked into that, whether the fact that we require Hebrew signatures on a ksuva is merely convention or whether it's halacha. I don't know the answer. I'll try and find out for you. As a matter of fact, let me, I'll make a note to myself. Yeah. I believe that is kosher because it's just a promissory note. Yeah. So a ksuva could be in a foreign language. The convention is not to do that. If you buy a ksuva today, some of the ksuvas are written in both Hebrew and English. We tell people not to get that because the English is not a translation of the Aramaic. It's a flowery prose that has really no relation to the actual ksuva. It just basically says the groom Charles Cohen has committed himself to cherish and love and preserve the relationship and care for his bride, and the bride in turn promises to cherish, and it's all what we would call bull. It's a love story, and it's not. So we always tell the chassan and kala, do not get, even if the Aramaic text is 100% kosher. The problem with it is that it's almost like a ziyuf. It's almost like a forgery, because you're misrepresenting the text. Okay. So I think we're going to hold it here. Davening is at 6:40 this morning because of the fast. The fast begins in 6 minutes, or 5 minutes, I should say. So go ahead and get your last licks in, and Mirz Hashem will continue tomorrow. Have a great day, a meaningful Asara B'Tei.